Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first Migrant Leaders Mentors quarterly webinar. My name is Elham Fardad. I am the founder and CEO of the charity Migrant Leaders. I have met and spoken to many of you previously, but I thought, being as this is with a video, you can see me, and I would introduce myself. I'm really delighted to be here with you. Thank you for the fantastic turnout in this first quarterly webinar for our mentors. And we really started these webinars, even though we have an annual mentors conference in person and we have a very high engagement with our mentors. We started these quarterly webinars for our mentors based on feedback that mentors wanted even more engagement. So here we are. What we plan to do is always to have a 10-minute introduction by one of our team members, either myself or our head of operations, Fawzia Hart, or Catherine Grice, who's recently joined our core team, and you will meet her today as well. And then that will always follow with a keynote speaker. So today we are honored to have Mary Bosworth, who is a professor of criminology at Oxford University. She will be talking today about the importance of representation. This is Black History Month, and Mary's work is particularly relevant with her expertise in border control and immigration policy. So the work that she does at Oxford University directly informs government policy around immigration, and she'll be talking about the importance of representation in her department and the fantastic work that she does. After Mary's talk, we will be introducing you to Anu, who is actually one of the PhD students in Mary's department, and she is one of the beneficiaries of a program that Mary leads, and I will let Anu and Mary talk about that. After Mary and Anu's talk, we will be opening up the floor to all the mentors so that you can share your experiences of mentoring with migrant leaders, your best practices, your challenges, questions, answers, and we will also be sharing with you all the resources that are available within the Migrant Leaders Development Program to support our mentors. And that should then cover our 1 hour together today. So thank you so much. I will be sharing my screen with you because for my 5 minutes, I want to talk about something. And you will see that I will be talking about our latest impact report. You should be able to see my screen now. This is our latest impact report, which I've just published. And of particular interest to you should be the recent report that was published by the Institute for Fiscal Studies, Dayton Review. And one of the questions that often I get asked is, do you think that the challenges that ethnic minorities face is as a result of disadvantage or discrimination? And the reality is that it's both. And the Dayton Review Institute for Fiscal Studies report really summarized this very well, because when we look at second-generation ethnic minorities, in other words, second-generation migrants, they do very well in education in the UK. In fact, almost double the rate of university degree attainment. Second-generation migrants, around 39 to 55% of them get a degree, whereas that number for the white British majority in the UK is 26%. But then when you look at employment rates for the same group, they're actually 5 to 10% behind in employment rates when you look at the same group. And when you look at professional jobs and managerial roles in terms of progression in the labour market, they are even further behind, depending on the ethnic groups that you look at and depending on the gender. For example, if you look at Pakistani and Bangladeshi females, around 39 to 50% of those second-generation migrants have degrees. And yet, around 9 to 12%, they perform 9 to 12% lower in terms of reaching managerial or professional jobs. That, to me, tells me that some of the root causes of this is really spread in terms of both disadvantage as well as some discrimination. And that's why any overall measures to just boost social mobility and dishing out the same solution to everybody and all disadvantaged backgrounds is not going to be enough. And that's why our Migrant Leaders program is quite bespoke and targeted. We really go after the root causes of those disadvantages and the root causes of why first and second generation young migrants don't go on to achieve the employment success and progression that they clearly deserve. Some of the things that we do, as you know, is that we, through our training, through our pre-mentoring program, through our training, through our workshops, exposures and contacts we give them, we try to build social capital in them so that they get used to liaising with and working with senior executives in corporates. They get used to interviews, assessment centers, and work experiences that helps them build that social capital and skills. We also give them contacts. Often, as you know, that the mentees that we recruit, we now have over 800 of them. Each of them get a Migrant Leaders mentor that matches the mentee's sector and technical aspirations and the development needs that we've discovered in that mentee through the application process and throughout their time with us on the Migrant Leaders Development Program. So we match them to a mentor, but that's not all. In many cases, we see that some of the mentees are really strong academically, they have high aspirations, the connection and the mentoring is helping them, but they need additional help to know how to deal with interviews, how to present themselves, how to gain confidence, how to be coached in terms of getting those top jobs. So we give them further support, further coaching, and really addressing mentee by mentee all the root causes of why these numbers in the data review are where they are. So we continue, and this is really what Migrant Leaders is all about, getting those results for these deserving young people. So I won't take any more of the floor, and I am going to pass to Professor Mary Bosworth, who will be talking about the importance of representation. Thank you.
Thank you, Elham, and hi, everybody. I'm going to share my screen. Can you see that, hopefully? It's been a while since I've used Zoom. So thank you very much for inviting me to speak today, and I'm very pleased to be a part of this great organization. And I was very pleased that Anu actually was the one who I think put me in touch with Elham. So that's it's all very much close to my heart, because one of the things I've been trying to do a lot at the University of Oxford, where I am the director of the Centre for Criminology, is I've been really trying to build up the representation of students from Black and minority ethnic communities, because Oxford has traditionally not recruited particularly widely, although I think that that is changing a lot. And there's a lot of work that's being done in Oxford at the undergraduate level, but there's a little bit less work that's been done at the postgraduate level. So the Centre for Criminology spearheaded the creation of studentships. So we created a BAME studentship in partnership with Brasenose College, and Anu was the first recipient. And I'm still trying to create other kinds of similar studentships for the master's program, because as you'll see, there's a problem in the criminal justice system around issues of race and ethnicity. And basically, criminology is the academic discipline along with law, and we're in the law faculty in Oxford, where the key academic discipline that feeds into policy around criminal justice, and we're also the sort of critical friend, I guess, of lots of government departments trying to suggest reforms and changes that could be made. So I think, as you'll see, if there's an overrepresentation within the criminal justice system of particular communities, then it's very important that the discipline which sort of informs policy is equally well represented. So my own work is actually in the field of border control, and I'd be very happy to talk about that. But today I thought what I would do instead is I would at least, start with talking to you just about the regular criminal justice system, because this is really, I think, an area where there is, you're probably broadly familiar with some of the issues I'm going to talk about, but this is an important area for us to really have the sort of facts and figures at our fingertips. So these topics on this slide are what I'll be going to run through in the time I have to talk to you. And I'm essentially going to be talking about overrepresentation and underrepresentation and the effects that those factors have on justice and the system itself, and how we could try and challenge them, and specifically how the Centre for Criminology is trying to challenge them. And then I'll hand over to Anu, who's going to tell you a little bit about her research. So what do we know about race and ethnicity in the criminal justice system? Well, slightly strangely, we don't necessarily know quite as much as you'd think we would know, because actually criminology, until relatively recently, hasn't really devoted itself to centering these issues. And what tends to happen in the policy world and also in the academic world is that attention is driven to thinking about race and ethnicity following particular tragic events or high-profile events. So in the UK, in the 1990s, the Stephen Lawrence inquiry led to a very long-standing interest and concern with the relationship between the police, particularly in London, and Black and minority ethnic communities, and the impact of race there. Some years later, the killing of a young man, Zahid Mubarak, while he was in prison in Feltham by a cellmate who was a white supremacist, led to a sort of similar level of interest in issues of race and ethnicity in terms of how prisons are governed. So as a field in the policy world, and academic research often follows alongside that, you see this kind of upsurge of interest following tragedy, which is not the most effective way of trying to bring about change, because then people are always responding to what are terrible events and what are sometimes exceptional events, at least in the case of the killing of Zahid Mubarak. Flowing from both of those two events, the government responded and now has a sort of ongoing and fairly comprehensive monitoring of race and ethnicity statistics. So in the UK or in England or Wales, it's very easy to pull a bunch of numbers out to try and see what's going on inside the criminal justice system, which is very helpful for those of us who are working on it. It's not to say that there's been no independent academic work separate to these sort of signal events. There is, of course, a long-standing field of very critical scholarship within all sorts of academic disciplines. And so in criminology, we could easily, develop a sort of bibliography of when this began and who's been important in that literature. And I think a lot of the most important scholars have themselves been members of Black and minority ethnic communities, or in the case of Stuart Hall, also himself an immigrant. And so his famous book, written in the 70s, Policing the Crisis, sort of underpins a whole series of debates around policing, around community, around what constitutes a crisis. There's all sorts of literature that comes out from that study. And it's also important to acknowledge that there's a lot of activism within the community, within community organizations, around issues related to criminal justice. And we've seen this most recently, obviously, in some of the terrible cases that have happened in London around rape and murder of women, and lots of those sorts of activist organizations, they cross the community. So they're not just focused on particular sections of the community, but they'll sort of broaden to the issue around, say, violence against women or victimization. What I would like to do now is just talk to you a little bit about the criminal justice system itself and what we know about race and ethnicity within the criminal justice system. And I think the sort of beginning point is to acknowledge that if we're using this language of representation and over and under representation, then it's helpful to start with the agents of criminal justice themselves. And as you can see in this slide, and these figures are all produced now by the government, because they're measuring and monitoring these things, what you can see is within different sectors of the criminal justice system, you can see a fairly sort of stark distribution of different communities within it. And so whereas, for instance, the Crown Prosecution Service looks as though it's sort of improving in its representation, if you look at court judges, that hasn't really changed all that much. So what you end up finding, and I think this probably maps onto what Elham just said, is that there's a hierarchy within the criminal justice system, and people will be moving into different roles, but perhaps not always kind of into the most senior roles, or they will be clustering in certain parts of the justice system itself. And that obviously, well, perhaps not obviously, but that appears to have an effect on how the justice system operates. And so that makes the sort of interesting academic question of why does representation have an effect and how does it have an effect? So this is the underrepresentation. We can see that the practitioners in the criminal justice system, although the number of the people from the white ethnic group has been decreasing, it's still an overrepresentation. When you turn to the clients, as it were, of the criminal justice system, you see the reverse. And so this is a slide which gives you the overview of all of the issues. And you'll be pleased to know I'm not going to run through every single one of these. You'd have to take a course in Oxford for me to do that. But what I think the ones which I will be focusing on are the factors to do with policing, so stop and search and arrests, and then custodial remands and custodial sentences and prison population. So the sort of the entry into the criminal justice system, and then the hardest outcome of the criminal justice system, prisons. I think this slide is also, I think it's a little bit concerning, this slide, in how it's divided in by age, because here you see that for children, so in the 17 and under, you start to see that the sort of overrepresentation of Black and minority ethnic communities is even higher among the younger people. And that could be a statistical effect because the numbers overall are smaller, so you just need a few to sort of make it look like it's a big problem. But I think it's something which is a matter for all of us to be concerned about, to look at the sort of overrepresentation of young people of colour, for instance, who are being convicted for crimes, and that would, I'm sure, map onto various forms of sentences that are used against particular kinds of crimes. And here I'm thinking around crimes with multiple members, so which kind of draw lots of people into the justice system. So why do we have this overrepresentation of people of color in different parts of the criminal justice system? Well, there's lots of different explanations, and we don't have any completely sort of fixed explanation, but one explanation that has been very significant within the criminal justice system itself was actually put forward in the Macpherson report in 1999, which is this notion of institutional racism. And so the Macpherson report followed the killing of Stephen Lawrence, which, if you remember, he was a young Black man who was stabbed in the street. And when the police responded, they initially thought he was the offender, not the victim. And the slowness of their response seems to have contributed to his death. And also the people who killed him were not arrested. And so there was a public inquiry, and the Macpherson report, which did not blame individual officers. What Macpherson said is that he said that there had been a collective failure of the organization. And so this is this idea of institutional racism. And this notion speaks to the question of representation, because one of the solutions that Macpherson put forward is that one of the key ways to try and combat institutional racism is to increase and improve your diversity of your workforce. So the London Met, who were the sort of police force in question, did a lot of work at the time around hiring, around working with the community, and sort of trying to address and adjust the views within their workforce. Now, there'd be questions you might want to ask about the success or failure of that approach, but that approach has been one which has sort of shaped many responses to the criminal justice system, and which is based on this idea that who does the work is actually important to how the work is done. There are other explanations which are more, which at face value look a little bit more descriptive of some of the causes for the overrepresentation of Black and minority ethnic people in the criminal justice system. And one of them is the uneven distribution of victimization. And so in this slide, you can see that sorry, I hope the noise from outside isn't coming through. You can see that that Black people in the slide on the left were more likely to be victims of personal crime, according to the crime survey. And the reason why this would affect the sort of number of people who are arrested and then convicted is that crime tends to be something which people commit against other people who are similarly situated to themselves. So, I don't travel if I feel like going to rob somebody. I don't travel to another part of town. I would tend to do my robbery in the part of town that I'm familiar with. And the way that housing works, that would generally mean that I'd be robbing somebody who is similarly situated to myself, probably a similar member of a similar racial or ethnic group in a similar socioeconomic category. So there is an explanation here that says that part of the overrepresentation is actually relates to crime. That doesn't close down questions around representation. It also doesn't close down the sorts of issues that Elham began with in terms of deprivation and the sort of enduring effect of that. Because what it really suggests to us is that if you are a member of if you live in a part of the city which is going to have higher rates of unemployment and fewer opportunities, then you're also going to be likely to be, more likely to be a victim of crime, and then sort of be surrounded by people who are more likely to be part of the criminal justice system and engaged with the criminal justice system. So I think we see here the sort of nexus between deprivation and the criminal justice system. And then there's the sort of other explanation, which is a bit depressing given how long ago the recommendations of the Macpherson report were about trying to respond to institutional racism, which concerned the activities of the police. And so one of the main routes into the criminal justice system is obviously that you have to be arrested in order for that to happen. And so the police are an extremely important gatekeeper to the criminal justice system. And there's been a lot of research and a lot of activism and a lot of attempts to challenge this practice of stop and search, because stop and search is, we have very long-standing and very robust evidence that stop and search is disproportionately used against young men who are members of Black and minority ethnic communities. And you see here that there's specifically a London effect. So it's specifically a power that is used a lot in London, but that this drives a kind of entry into the criminal justice system, which then contributes to the disproportionate representation of different communities. And this would all be fine if we could be confident that, the police were the ones who were catching all of the crime and that these stops and searches were always warranted. But unfortunately, the research evidence does not back that up, and that we know that this is about targeting. It's about sort of use of policing resources rather than necessarily a response to a kind of fact of where all the crime is occurring. Again, there's another kind of seemingly sort of neutral reason for why there's an overrepresentation of Black and minority ethnic people in prison, at least, which is this slide on the right about white defendants consistently had the highest guilty plea rate. The reason why this actually can lead to a sort of lower representation of white people in prison is that it means that they would be more likely to get the sort of sentence reduction because they've had a guilty plea rate. So one of the things, again, we have a long amount of evidence for is that, especially here, the Black population are much more likely to refuse any kind of agreement for their sentence. They're less likely to plead guilty, and they're more likely to go to trial. And then that means that they're actually more likely to get a longer sentence because they don't get the reduction from having done the guilty plea. So, and for people who are concerned about these things, you might want to wonder: is that about legal representation? Is that about access to a lawyer who can kind of persuade you about how the process works, or is it because that actually the Black defendants felt that they were innocent and that they wanted it to sort of go all the way through and see what happens? I would assume it was about access to a good lawyer and access to a lawyer who they could actually felt was going to be fairly representing their interests. In prisons, the overrepresentation question in prisons, it both obviously comes out of being arrested and being sentenced, but a very recent report that just came out last year from the Inspectorate of Prisons found an additional reason, which they said is of concern, which is that the rehabilitation and release planning which prisons run are actually not working very effectively for Black and minority ethnic prisoners. So they did a very extensive study of outcomes, but also of experiences. The report's very interesting to read, and they effectively found that on all sorts of measures of subjective experiences, that actually BME prisoners had worse outcomes. They had lower levels of trust in the system. They had lower levels of trust in officers. They had much poorer experiences of prison life. They had much less contact with their family members. And they reported, and HMIP seemed to find as well, a kind of lack of understanding from staff about the impact of prejudice on their experiences of being a prisoner. So when they were looking at measures, they would have been looking at, did people enroll in the education classes? Did they actually take advantage of the work offerings? Were they getting any qualifications? And they found that over and over again, there was a much lower uptake of all of those opportunities by BME prisoners. And again, we know that those are the opportunities that when you're released, they're likely to help you, not go back to prison again. And so if there's a lower uptake in prison, then they'll come out and they'll be much more likely to reoffend and kind of continue in this circle of being in prison. Interestingly, and obviously we don't really have time for this at all, but they did find some gender differences. So women had better outcomes, which I think is interesting. And I think it's interesting to think around how race and gender intersect. And obviously interesting in terms of the work of this organization. Is it young men who are the ones who really need sort of a certain kind of step up and support, and is there another point where perhaps women do, because they maybe are encountering issues which might be more specifically related to gender issues, for instance, having children or things like that. I suspect I might be running out of time. Just wave at me, Elham, if that is the case. I just wanted to give you, and I won't go into this in any detail at all, but I wanted to just give you a little bit more of a sense of the discipline of criminology, because I think criminology, like a lot of parts of society at the moment, is going through a kind of reckoning on some level around questions of race and ethnicity. And it's partly because as I said at the beginning, we're the discipline that sort of speaks to the government about the kind of practices that they set in place in response to crime. But we've never really, as a discipline, centered issues of race and ethnicity. And what I think has happened is that we're kind of playing catch up on some level with social movements and with the historical moment. And this is coming from sort of two different angles. So on the one hand, you have the much more US-based debates around Black Lives Matter and also around prison abolitionism. So in America, there's a lot of there's been a long-standing community activism in Black community groups around both of those two things, which I think have since George Floyd's killing have reached, obviously much more familiarity across the world. And then you have from the UK side, you have the sort of current reckoning and thinking about the colonial past, lots of the debates around immigration. And I think one of the things that's happening is sort of trying to join those two debates and trying to figure out which are the bits that maybe have their roots in America, which perhaps speak to some of the questions in the UK. So, for instance, around the ongoing inequalities in stop and search, and which don't. So, around police officers and guns, perhaps that's less relevant here. And then how to build in some of the sort of, immense diversity of British society, which flows from the history of colonialism and from past and current immigration. And that's really where my field, my own research is centered. So my own research is much more on this kind of interconnection between criminal justice control and border control. And that's the sort of work which the Centre for Criminology has really been pioneering. So the Centre for Criminology has done a lot of work in these new emerging fields, Southern criminology, which is trying to sort of think about what goes on in the global South. We have a global criminal justice hub. I myself run an organization called Border Criminologies, which is about policy and practice of immigration control. And then we're seeing this also in the wider discipline that there's been a creation of this Race Matters network in the British Society of Criminology. And it's turning into a kind of increase also in the student numbers and a kind of changing population of students. And so I think when I look now, when I teach my undergraduate option in the Oxford Law faculty, the Oxford Law degree rather, it's very clear that the students who are taking that course now are quite different to the students who were taking it just 2 or 3 or 4 years ago. And we see this also very much in our outreach work that we're doing at the postgraduate level. So to conclude, the reason why representation matters for criminal justice, and I would argue for justice itself, is that the criminal justice system drives and reflects social inequalities. And so it's a very troubling moral and I think policy question that criminal justice systems anywhere really, and I would challenge you to think of a criminal justice system that doesn't have this. They all have overrepresentation of racial and ethnic minority communities within them. The specific populations may differ, but they're all shaped by inequalities and overrepresentations. And those overrepresentations have an enduring effect, not just on the individuals, but also on the communities. And the enduring effects can be practical. So there's been a lot of work done in the United States that shows that, communities which there's this idea of $1 million block in Brooklyn, that you can have a sort of a neighborhood in Brooklyn where all the government investment in that community is actually in the prison in northern New York where all the men are. So just imagine what would happen if you did justice reinvestment and you took that money and you invested it actually in that community rather than in the prison. So you see this sort of reduced opportunities, insecurity, increase in violence, increase in victimization. You also see it in these more, I think, subtle discussions around stigma and criminalization, and talk how neighborhoods and individuals become cast as dangerous or suspect. And then the sort of trouble with race is that it has an expanding logic in this way. And so here we see a lot in the UK at the moment around the criminalization of migration, which then leads us to find it very difficult to differentiate between people who have a well-founded fear of persecution, and therefore we ought to be applying international law, versus other people who we think are dangerous and threatening. And one of the factors that blurs those questions for us is actually, I think, the criminalization of whole communities and the way in which we tend to take ideas of race and apply them to other communities. So for too long, criminology is just considered race as a data point, but now I think that's changing and it's becoming much more of a conceptual focus. And I think that Anu is probably going to take over now and give you just a taste of how that can look, because she's doing something which is completely novel and extremely creative and isn't depressing like this at all, is actually widening the lens even further to think about the impact of race and ethnicity and migration on our understanding of justice. So thank you. That's it from me, and I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Mary. Certainly food for thought. I know that the criminal justice system and the implications of lack of representation has grave consequences, but it doesn't take a huge leap for us and our mentors at Migrant Leaders to think about the consequences of lack of representation in the corporates. So it does actually help to see the consequences in the criminal justice system and to have used this as food for thought about what this means for representation in corporates and our talent pipelines and what Migrant Leaders tries to do. So I shall hand over to Anu. If you can take 3 or 4 minutes, Anu, to describe your work, we would be most grateful, because that will then leave around 15 minutes for our mentors to have a discussion. Thank you. Would you like to introduce yourself, Anu?
Hi, good afternoon. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Yep, awesome. Thank you so much, Elam, for the introduction, and Professor Bosworth for the great talk. So my name is Anu Adeboga, and I'm a DPhil student at the Centre for Criminology at Oxford, and I'm also a trustee of Migrant Leaders Foundation. So it's actually super exciting to be here today and to actually be involved in 2 incredible organizations and to see the work that's happening on both ends to create opportunities and really open new pathways for young people of all backgrounds, which is something that I'm incredibly passionate about and have been a beneficiary of. And so just a little bit about myself before I just dive into what my research is essentially about. So I grew up in East London to an immigrant Nigerian working class family, and I was in many ways encouraged or coerced to pursue, in a way, a fixed career option, and that was to become a doctor. And whilst I recognize there are young people of all ethnic and class backgrounds that perhaps aren't even encouraged to aspire to that, there is something about the Nigerian immigrant community that prizes being a doctor, being an accountant, being an engineer as like the pinnacle of career success. And actually, with further conversations with first generation immigrants and with my dad, I found that a lot of that stems from a sense of insecurity and fear, really, about the future of their child. This idea that pursuing traditionally professional careers would limit, in one way, the exposure of, or the negative effects of being ethnically and racially different. So I remember my dad would, buttress his point by referencing certain ethnic groups that perhaps gave their children names that people in the West would struggle to pronounce, or they spoke with accents that could be difficult to understand. But he would argue that, their intelligence, their work ethic, can't be questioned. And apparently the necessity of their roles as doctors and surgeons and GPs meant that they couldn't be easily dismissed. So there was this idea that, whether or not you're preferred, whether or not you're liked, whether or not you're wanted, try and be indispensable, study towards being indispensable, pursue a career that is, in a way, traditionally recognized as necessary. And so, as, a child of immigrant parents, I was encouraged to go down that path, with the view of limiting, in a way, the subjectivities that could bar me from accessing opportunities. Of course, we know that's not necessarily the case, and across various industries and sectors, people face discrimination on the basis of their gender, their race, their class, their abilities or disabilities. But as mentors, as professionals that mentor, young people of various minority and migrant backgrounds, it is important to kind of keep that in mind, because you may have you may have encountered or you will encounter a young person sort of tussling with their definition of success or what their career path is, and trying, despite that, to navigate the expectations of their immigrant parent and sort of the conflict that can arise with that. And so, careers in, art, creativity, tech, research weren't encouraged. In fact, they were perceived as, risky ventures. And for me, I studied law and I graduated with strong classification. So you can imagine the shock of my parents when I kind of approached them and said, I'm interested in this subject that ends in ology. And they were just completely confused. They were like, what are you talking about? You have a law degree. The next step is, am I going to be a solicitor? Am I going to be a barrister? What's this ology thing? And I remember having discussions with them and sort of getting them to understand that I'm curious about, what is crime and what causes it and how do we prevent it? And do victim experiences of crime differ? And why does it matter to take that into account? And I just remember them thinking, this is interesting, but is it suitable for you? Other people can do it, but do you have that luxury of choice? Can you afford to sort of pursue this interest? Can you get a job in criminology? Can you sort of base a career on criminology? And if not, then perhaps it's just not for you. And one of the things that sort of enabled me to take up that opportunity was actually the creation of a studentship. So when I found out about the MSc in criminology and criminal justice at the University of Oxford, I was absolutely fascinated, but could not afford it. And so it meant everything, and it really meant the whole world of difference that Professor Bosworth had partnered with the Kalisha Trust, which is a legal charity run by senior judges and barristers in the UK that provide financial support to young people of modest backgrounds, but sort of have that interest and potential towards criminal justice, being involved in criminal justice, or pursuing the criminal bar. And so that was really my way into this whole Oxbridge world. And since being on ground and doing the MSc, I guess I was exposed to research and knowledge production as a worthy pursuit, as something that I could do, as something that, as Professor Bosworth has alluded to, still requires diverse voices and diverse perspectives, not just observing different communities as, subjects of research, but actually empowering people from these various communities with the skills, with the ability to pursue education beyond undergrad and to actually get involved in creating knowledge around the issues that concern them. And so it was an incredible experience on the MSc. And then when an opportunity came up again to perhaps take my research interests a bit further, it meant, again, a world of difference that Professor Bosworth had been able to create a BAME PhD scholarship, which I was incredibly fortunate to have access to. And so with that, I'm now deciding to increase the representation of Black women in criminological research. And I'm looking at an aspect of domestic violence that is under-researched, misunderstood, and not so often talked about despite its prevalence across the world. And that is child-to-parent violence and abuse. So it's a growing research field, with research sort of just coming forward in the last 10 to 15 years. But a lot of that research centers on families that, both in the US and the UK, they center a lot on white families. And there is a need for diversity in that field, not just on the matter of race and culture, but also needing to consider diverse family structures. So what about matrifocal households? What about adoptive families, foster families? What about single or even blended family structures? How does this phenomenon manifest in those families? But also looking at race and looking at culture and looking at ethnicity, these are notions that can affect the way people do family. They can affect expectations around appropriate behavior within the home. And so looking at Nigerian women and looking at how they navigate motherhood when violence and abuse occurs within the home is something that I thought would be interesting to consider, and something that, and an experience I thought that the scholarship should consider and include. And so what I've decided to do is to explore motherhood, Black motherhood in Britain, but to also look at how issues of migration, gender, race, ethnicity, but also religion come together and frame how these mothers help seek. What are the factors that guide their decision to disclose? Are they thinking about their identity? Are they thinking about the identity of their child before deciding to disclose? Who do they feel comfortable disclosing to? And how do institutions respond to their suffering? And so these are some of the issues that I'm sort of exploring with my research. I'm now in the second year of my DPhil. So it's going steady. It's going steady. And yeah, so as a trustee of the Migrant Leaders Foundation, and as a two-time beneficiary of the incredible work that's happening at the Center for Criminology, I am really excited at the potential of both organizations working together, collaborating, and sort of creating more opportunities for young people. So that's essentially all I have to say. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Anu. That was brilliant. That was brilliant. And you really brought to life the endeavors that Professor Mary Bosworth is pursuing, and why it is really important that our mentors knew not only about the importance of representation in the criminal justice system, repercussions for the whole of society, economy, and corporates, but also that the department is looking for further collaborations, further funding to enable these scholarships to continue, so that this important work and representation progress can continue. So I would say that if any of the migrant leaders mentors are interested to contact Anu and or Professor Mary Bosworth afterwards, when I distribute the recording of this conference, in that email I will share with Professor Bosworth's permission her email address, and please feel free to contact her with your thoughts, connections, and support for the important work that they're doing in Professor Mary Bosworth's department. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Anu. So with that, without further ado, I am going to pass the floor to our migrant leaders mentors. I would like to welcome comments, challenges, positive stories, negative stories, achievements, any anecdotes that you can share from your mentoring experience with migrant leaders. Please feel free to put your hands up and tell us either in the chat or in person. While everyone thinks about that, one of the things that we wanted to mention actually is some of the resources that are available as support to our migrant leaders mentors. When you join as a mentor, you know that I sent you your mentor onboarding email, which signposts the resources available to you, such as our mentors guide, our policies and procedures, our Capfinity strength profile assessments that are an online tool as a result of our partnership with Capfinity. These are strength profile assessments that mentors and mentees can do to help the mentee find their particular talents, strengths, and character, so that that can lead to good quality mentoring conversations. The Young Leaders model and modules that we developed internally some 3 years ago in the charity is also another really useful tool to help the mentors and mentees have good conversations around how do you form a vision for your career. How do you then turn that into a plan and action? How do you then handle yourself, lead yourself, and lead others and influence others on that journey? So that's our Young Leader model and modules that you will find on our website as tools for you to use in your quality mentoring conversations. But also, more recently, we have developed a pre-mentoring program. And this is really in response to what we have noticed, that some of our mentees, many of our mentees, don't have the social capital or the experience of liaising with senior corporate executives as mentors. So we put them through a pre-mentoring program to show them how to dial into conference calls, how to turn up on time, how to do what they say, how to liaise with corporate mentors who are pretty senior. And really, I would class this as building social capital and some ways of work which is lacking in so many of our mentees, and that's all part of the journey of being part of the Migrant Leaders Development Program. So these are examples of some of the tools and support that we can give you, and of course, if you have any challenges, good stories, or anything, you can contact myself and Fawzia, and we will give you further bespoke support. And also, if you feel you've reached a good milestone with your mentee, you can always go on our website and fill in a performance review for your mentee as well, which we receive in our CRM system and we look at and take corrective action with. And keep in our records. So that is just an example of some of the tools and support that you can expect as mentors. I'd be interested to see whether any mentors have any questions or thoughts that they would like to share, any experiences.
Hello. I don't know. Is there like a line or something, or can we just jump in with questions?
Hello, Stefanos. You can either ask your question in person or put it in the chat. If you prefer to talk, you can do that as well.
Yeah, that's easy. I mean, I've also noticed that in the chat, there's also someone else who had a similar question. I'm relatively new. Like, I just found out through work about this great organization. Very interesting presentations, by the way. I just wanted to know what the process would be like in terms of next steps to actually get officially involved and start having like mentees one-to-one. I don't know if there are any guidelines. I know you referred to some guidelines, but I mean, I haven't gotten any communication on them. But yeah, so question.
That's a really good question, Stefanos. You are very new in Migrant Leaders, and we match mentees to mentors based on the mentees' development needs and aspirations. That process can take several weeks for us, and that is partly a function of matching the mentee to the right mentor, but also simply that Fawzia and I get together and talk about the matching, and it takes us a bit of time. We've learned a lot over the last 3-4 years since I launched Migrant Leaders 4 years ago. And we're going to take that learning and we are going to start the high-level design of a Migrant Leaders Migrant Leaders app, which will hopefully give some more power to the mentors and enable the mentors to once the matching happens, to have more than one option for saying yes to one or more mentees, and it will give the mentors more power to select mentees to have one or more conversations with. So we are at the moment starting the high-level design of this, and hopefully it will improve your mentor experience in that regard. Once we have a match for you, Stefanos, we will be in touch with you by email and we'll propose the mentee that we've matched. We'll share with you the rationale behind that match, and you get to say yes or no. If you say yes, we put you in touch with the mentee, and if you say no, we'll find you another mentee within our program.
Okay, I see. So then it's just a matter of waiting then.
It is indeed, but if you feel inclined to contact us by email, feel free to email mentors@migrantleaders.org.uk, and we will respond to you directly.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for joining. Okay, any other questions?
Yeah. Hi, Elam. It's Troy.
Hello, Troy. Welcome.
Hi. So really enjoyed the presentations. Really thought-provoking. I was just thinking, you know, we did these small internships this year, and I know other companies are doing that. You know, is one thought that we actually try and plan ahead a little bit, and actually at the beginning of the year think about, for example, what we want to do in the middle of the year, so it turns into a bit more of a coordinated campaign. So just a thought.
Absolutely, Troy, and I'm eternally grateful that you actually suggested for us to do these quarterly mentors webinars, and I can see by the demand for 50-60 people turning up was a really good idea, Troy. Thank you very much for that. And in terms of the kind of planning, the way I'm dealing with the corporate collaborations, such as the fantastic internships, on-site internships you delivered this summer in July, and the Kantar, we're doing virtual internships across 4 divisions in Kantar, and we're in our 2nd and 3rd year of doing that. So those collaborations, there's a pipeline of corporate partners that I'm talking to, and there are at least 10 or 15 corporates in that pipeline right now where I'm discussing different types of collaborations. The good news is we can be flexible. Collaborations could be a workshop, could be a conference for A-level students, could be a 2-3 day virtual or on-site work experience for targeted students who are interested in that company and industry. So it can be any of such things or other ideas. And if any of the mentors and their organizations are potentially interested in such a collaboration, feel free to email me and we will start the discussions. And I kind of manage that as a pipeline of collaborations with corporates, and we tend to time them around student holidays, which is really Easter, Christmas, summer, and occasionally on a Friday afternoon when students can join a webinar or an on-site conference.
Okay, super. Thanks, Ellen.
Thanks, Troy. Thank you. Some lovely feedback in the chat. Thank you so much, everyone. I hear really good stuff. Jonathan, thank you so much, saying that your 2 mentees have now joined your organization. That's wonderful as IT staff. That's great to hear. And Jonathan, your organization, FDM, is brilliant for mentees with IT skills, and we've got plenty of those. So we love working with you. Lots and lots of great feedback. And a question for senior mentors from Dr. Elaine Pang. How do you encourage mentees to develop resilience and not give up easily? That's a really, really good one. We knew that there's a need for this. And now with COVID lockdowns, as I have 7 or 8 direct mentees myself, and particularly with university students, I've noticed those ones in the STEM subjects, engineering, biomedical science, who are supposed to be in a lab, are finding it very difficult, often being told they have to work in their halls of residence, in their room, and they genuinely worry about, am I really getting the best out of my education? So they have genuine worries. We've done a lot from the beginning of Migrant Leaders 4 years ago to deliver resilience training. Mary Keatley is a mental toughness and resilience coach, and she's a member of the Migrant Leaders Advisory Board, and she's done multiple talks and training for our mentors and mentees. We also build resilience modules and resilience training into our materials that are on our website, and that's targeted at mentees. So there's a module that we've developed internally as well, which is on our website for mentees. And also regularly in our mentees seminars, we collaborate with other external providers of resilience training, and around once or twice a year, we give that option for mentees to join such webinars with us, so that we can give them some training as well as bespoke Q&As, so that they feel engaged with our charity. And I know from personal experience, Fawzia, myself, Catherine, and everyone else on the team, we're regularly contacted by individual mentees with individual problems, and we try and support them in a bespoke way. And I am looking at further questions. Again, it's wonderful to hear the feedback, to see that everyone has found this webinar helpful, useful, good to engage, and I cannot begin to say how grateful I am to you guys as mentors. Migrant Leaders Charity would really be nothing without our mentors. This is what we are about, and it's because of the work that you guys are doing as Migrant Leaders mentors that our mentoring program is really, really admired. I get regularly approached by charities and other organizations to get feedback on how they can improve their mentoring programs, and for that I am very grateful to each and every one of you. Thank you. So any final questions or comments before we close off and let you all go? Fawzia, any final comment from you? Fawzia and Catherine, key members of our team.
Ellen, sorry, can I say something?
Alicia, nice to see you. Thank you for joining.
Likewise, it's the first event. Thank you very much. And of course, just my comment, it would be great to have it in person, maybe next year, but it's a very good start. And just thank you very much for everything you're doing. I just want to briefly share my experience, because when I became a mentor at your charity, and it happened just over a year ago, because I think I started in August or September last year. It was my first experience. I've never been a mentor before. And I started just like with a blank canvas. Like I didn't know what to expect and how I can potentially help. And it's just so rewarding to see the process that my mentee is literally taking everything on board, what I give her. And when we started, she wasn't even sure that she will get any spring, Easter internships. And now, like literally, the banks are fighting for her.
I remember.
She has a choice. She really has a choice. Like when she's now in a position when there is a program for, let's say, women in technology or women on the trading floor, and there is one day she has to spend in a lab, and she says, "Well, listen, I can't go that day. Can I come the second day?" And they just take her because, yes, we want you for next summer internship. And it's just amazing to see this.
Thank you so much. Alicia, you say you started from a blank sheet and hadn't experienced mentoring before. You were actually a really skilled mentor, because the transition you managed for Machi, being a chemistry student at UCL, not knowing what she wants to do, and you transitioned her so successfully into a vision for her future career. And as you say, landed 7 or 8, I remember the spring internships, which then made her even more determined to go in that direction. You handled it very skillfully, actually. And I'm so grateful. Thank you so much.
I just did it not from like a professional background, but something that I think what would help me if I was at her age, because what you really time well is that the timing when you connect mentors and mentees. We did it during the first year, and I think this is like a golden era. This is when they really need support, and if they don't get it, they might break because then it's just university sucks them in. So that's great if mentees are starting at that time, because obviously everybody's time scale is different, but that timing was just perfect.
Thank you so much for that feedback. I'm sure Fawzia can comment on that as well, around the fact that we try to recruit mentees just after their GCSEs, when they're 16, 17, 18. We do have some university applicants, but we tend to recruit most mentees just after their GCSEs during their A-levels for that exact reason, because we can have the biggest impact. I don't know, Fawzia, if you'd like to introduce yourself and have any further comments around that, that would be wonderful.
Hi, everybody. My name's Fawzia, and I've worked with migrant leaders for nearly 3 years, I think. I'm head of operations, and that involves me in interviewing the young mentees that apply to us, the young candidates that apply to us. And then also some of you, I don't know if Stefanos is still with us, he hasn't yet received his email from me, but I also add the mentor details to the database so that I can do the matching up. So it's a manual matching process at the moment. And that essentially means that periodically I will look at which mentees we have available, or which mentees we have waiting for mentors. And then I will have a look at which mentors are available and then try and match them up carefully. And Alicia, I remember matching up you with your mentee and then watching, as it was almost like watching somebody on the trading floor with their share prices because the offers were coming in and she was having to juggle the different offers, and that was doubtless due to the advice and guidance that you'd given to her to be able to, take on board those skills and present herself in a really positive way, and basically make herself an attractive candidate to potential employers, which is essentially what we're hoping, all of our mentees are going to achieve. So that's fantastic. And thank you. And I mean, we know your particular mentee, and we have contact with her, every now and then. And we see her progress. And the other comment I just quickly make, if I may, on the resilience question, we do have a guide to developing resilience for our mentees. And at the back of that, there is there is like a recommended process for looking at your capacity for resilience. And if mentors feel that they need to support their mentees in developing resilience, that will give you some guidance about how to help them think about that. So please go to our website and look at our guidance documents, and that will give you some ideas about that, which hopefully you'll find helpful. Was there anything else you wanted me to comment on, Elham? I'm sorry.
No, I think that is wonderful. That is wonderful. Thank you so much, Fawzia. And if I may, I'd like to also introduce Catherine Grice, a relatively new addition to our very special core team and a very valued team member, Catherine. Catherine, could you introduce yourself and explain what you do for migrant leaders?
Yeah, so my name's Catherine Grice, and I support the two hardest working women in charity. So I support Fawzia, who with the onboarding of our mentors, and I also support Elham with introducing Elham to lots of different schools and colleges and university students around the country. As a former teacher, that's something that I can use my skill set to do. So I really enjoy working with migrant leaders and getting to meet the mentors and the mentees is a new aspect to my role that I'm really enjoying, because I get to see the full picture now, and it's inspirational what you guys do, and we're very grateful for everything that you do to support us.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And I, for one, in all the discussions and chats that we've had, I have learned a lot from you, because I've spent 23 years hanging around corporate types, GE, News Corp, EY, and it's been a very important part of my journey as a charity leader to learn about the charity sector, to learn about education, to get a wider thinking and input into the direction for the charity. So I'm very, very grateful for that, and I continue to love working with you and our team. Thank you so much. Okay, so I don't see any further comments or questions. So I think without further ado, I think we will close the conference. Thank you once again, everyone, for attending this conference. Really, really grateful for your time and for the support that you give to the charity Migrant Leaders. And we look forward to continuing to work with you all. Thank you so much.